Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. This week we see two cultural institutions rejecting wokeness and being rewarded for it. Joining me now is the most cultured fellow I know. It's David Oldroyd Bolt. David, welcome. The first example of that is Wigmore Hall. I believe they've now rejected 340,000 or something from the Arts Council.
Yeah, so Wigmore Hall, along with many other cultural institutions in this country, has received grants from Arts Council England for many years. The director of Wigmore Hall, John Gilhooly, decided last year that actually the criteria for receiving these grants, that is to say that they had to sign up to AC's Let's Create scheme, which was founded in or instigated in 2020 and is much more about DEI than it is about supporting arts, were criteria that he did not want to subscribe to. Because, in his words, what they do at Wigmore Hall is akin to the Olympics when it comes to the arts, and these kind of things are much more appropriate for community associations. So, over the past year, he has built up a £10 million directors' fund, meaning that the money is no longer necessary and that they can concentrate on their core, which is providing the very, very best in particularly chamber music and solo piano and solo violin and voice.
So you're telling me there's an artistic institution that's just focusing on making good art? That sounds like it'll never catch on.
Really old-fashioned, isn't it? Because one of the things that was extraordinary about this Let's Create scheme is that it sought to challenge, quote, the prevailing classical music focus of opera, music theatre and classical music venues, which might be akin to criticising Chelsea for focusing on, say, football, or Wimbledon for focusing on, say, tennis. You might think that these are the things that it's supposed to do, but no, for the Arts Council in England it was much more important that they had these spurious notions of accessibility and of diversity and inclusion. And John Gilhooly decided this was... He's run the place for 20 years, he knows what he's doing, it's the finest concert hall in Britain, said this was no longer a necessary thing for them. They would rather do what they do for their very, very loyal audience and do it better and do it without having to have recourse to the state.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much it will catch on. I mean, I imagine there are some artistic institutions now who are very much more and more dependent on that money from the Arts Council. As they've gone down that route, that's where maybe the bulk of their... We're talking here, I think it was 3% of their income from Wigmore Hall. But by focusing less on creating great art, they're going to obviously, I imagine, have less ticket sales, need more grant money, and then it sort of becomes a race to the bottom.
Well, you would imagine so. And one of the instances of this, which is very sad, is the Royal Festival Hall. In fact, the whole South Bank Centre in London has now decided it will simply not open on Mondays. And they have gone deep into the woke rabbit hole over recent years. Their programming, and particularly what they're trying to do with new music, has had not anything to do, as far as I can see, with artistic excellence on the new music front, and everything to do with these, as I said earlier, spurious ideas of accessibility.
So you've got to write, like, quarterly reports.
You have to write 60-page quarterly reports.
The artistic output that you have is backing the DEI project.
And if you think that most of these places are running on shoestring budgets as it is, people in arts are not well paid, whether on the administrative side. And so if you've got someone who every quarter has to write a 60-page report, that is time that he or she is not spending on finding exciting new performers, on finding good new composers, or in the realms of dance, good new choreographers. And they're spending it on these idiotic schemes. And I think this is where there is going to come a crunch point before too long between what the public actually wants, which, as we see from Wigmore Hall and from the new Beckstein Hall and from the Barbican, it must be said, does this rather well, to provide core repertoire done to the very highest standard alongside new repertoire of extremely great artistic importance. Those things are winning, and where there are the adherences to the DEI mindset, where there is this reliance on the state funding, which comes with all these caveats, they're not succeeding. And I would say that within the next 5 years, it's going to be an interesting time in the arts for which have the courage to follow the example of Wigmore Hall and which stick to the ever more controlling tentacles of Arts Council England.
Well, this is it. So it's not just classical music or opera. We're also seeing this development. We're seeing things like Disney, they've lost millions, if not billions, on trying to implement these policies.
Yes, and the new Snow White film, which is bombed.
Yeah, we also saw it in historic houses, which has sort of been set up. I think they've had 10,000 new members join in the last year. And I imagine part of that is because they're a little bit cheaper than the alternatives, but also because they're just, again, focusing on the core project of allowing access to these spaces, rather than, you know, someone who once had something to do with slavery visited here.
The Historic Houses England is a body that individually owned houses join up to. It's not like the National Trust where it's run by the body. It's more of a sort of, you might say, a trade association. And so each house, you pay your money and then you pay to go in, but this is so that you can get some kind of discount on access. And each house is run by and often lived in the people either who built it or who've had it for centuries, and it's up to them. You know, some of them, for instance, Harwood in Leeds, in West Yorkshire, do have some kind of focus on how the money was created or earned that paid for it. Others, like Houghton and Hever, where Anne Boleyn grew up, are simply about the history of these places and why they remain important in their counties and to our general national story. And the director said in an interview with The Telegraph today, it is not for Historic Houses England, it is not for him to tell these people what they should or should not be doing with their houses. It's for them to provide a scheme that allows people to know where they can go and receive a good experience of what you might call heritage culture. And I think this is a good example to the National Trust, though it will probably choose not to follow the example, of how you can run a heritage body that gives people an intelligent view of history. It gives people a choice about how they access these things, and that treats people with the courtesy to think that they're probably going to know a little bit about these places anyway if they're choosing to visit them and spend not inconsiderable amounts of money doing so, and therefore they will be perfectly well aware that this country had in its past some slave trading, that this country had in its past connections with the sugar trade, that this country has in the past not always acted as the greatest moral arbiter, and yet that we have done things, particularly since the beginning of the 19th century, to address and to ameliorate that. Now, I would like to see, and we've discussed this before with bodies like Restore Trust, trying to bring the National Trust back to its founding principles of providing a safe haven, as it were, for country houses that would otherwise, because of depredations of taxation or the sheer economic unviability of running these things, providing them with that haven and allowing the public access to them. What I particularly like about Historic Houses England is that these places are, as I said, run by and lived in the people who built them.
So you can see someone on the toilet.
Well, I should hope you would at some point, but not here. And the point is that the National Trust has in its founding principles the idea that these places should be kept and should be used in their original way. And it's just not doing that. The number of National Trust houses that are practically empty or where they use some of it for offices and then you have a little bit that's on show is scandalous. These places are essentially going fallow and being allowed to rot away. Whereas if you have places like Wigmore Hall, where they're very much run as functioning estates, or if you have places like Harwood, where they are used not only as historic houses, but have local arts festivals and shows, I think this is how country houses should be used in the modern day and how people would like to see them.
Well, we'll see what happens. It's interesting to see how alternative financial models might be the thing to pull us out of some of the ideological madness that we've seen over the last 10 years or so. Anyway, thank you so